Eric Maskin. We are very happy that you came again to the Universitat Jaume I, and this is thanks to the collaboration between the Universitat Jaume I and the Fundación Rei Jaume. And we are going to conduct this interview colloquium together with, well, myself. I am Inma Martínez Arzoso, Director of the Institute of International Economics, and with Ainhoa Jaramillo, Secretary of the Doctorate School. So welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for coming, especially students, PhD students, colleagues from the department, Vice Rector, and general public. I'm going to start by introducing Professor Maskin. We have coincided already 2 years in Valencia, so I'm very happy to have been invited to present him. Eric Maskin is professor at Harvard University currently, Nobel Laureate in 2007, and the award was received jointly with Leonid Harvard and Roger Mearson for having laid the foundations of mechanism design theory. He has an extensive career. I won't have time to say everything, so I'm sorry about that. I will spend around 5 minutes. So the rest you have to go to his website and read it yourself. His career started in Harvard as well, preceded over by his Bachelor of Mathematics and also doctorate in applied mathematics both from Harvard University, and Nobel Laureate Ken Arrow was his PhD advisor, and he has also worked alongside a number of other Nobel Prize winners in economics like Michael Kremer, Abhiti Banerjee, Jean Tirole, who was your PhD student, and you have other prize-winning economists that are your friends like Amartya Sen. And you have worked in the most prestigious institutions, including Harvard, MIT, and Princeton. And you also did an stay in Cambridge University at Jesus College after your PhD. Professor Maskin is one of the best specialists in the field of information economics and the functioning of markets, auction systems, and the design of optimal contracting mechanisms in what is known as implementation theory. This is not easy to understand for everybody, so it's sort of reverse engineering in economics. So let's say that you have a very nice outcome, a social outcome that you want to achieve, but then the people, the agents that are involved in achieving this social outcome, they don't have all the information. So what he does is to implement or to study those mechanisms that are needed, if I understood well, that are needed to obtain this social outcome, this social optimum, and this is a very, very important contribution to many fields. So he analyzes the functioning of markets when the conditions under which the behavior of this market, that those conditions don't exist, and this is unfortunately in many, many cases in real life. Concerning applications in real life of his research, Professor Maskin designs, for example, decision mechanisms within organizations to achieve good governance. He is an expert in the analysis of incentives as well. And for example, mechanism design is often used to implement important social goals, like, for example, protecting the environment and establishing fair and effective voting systems. I was delighted when I was asked to present you in this colloquium. And while preparing my questions to you, I realized that we both have written a comment for Project Syndicate recently. My comment was about the future of remittances, and your comment was about voting systems. So I will start my questions with a reference to your commentary in Project Syndicate, a very actual topic, how to depolarize American politics. So, very difficult, I know. So your work has highlighted the shortcomings of the plurality voting system and proposed alternatives like the top 3 system. That is the one, the name I pick up from the Project Syndicate paper, or Condorcet voting that I took from a more recent paper with, both are with Edward Foley, your co-author for many years. So, given current global political challenges that are a lot, what do you see as the most promising path for implementing better voting systems in practice, especially in deeply divided societies? Thank you.
Well, first of all, let me say how happy I am to be here again. I think it's been 10 years since my last visit, and I very much appreciate the invitation and the warm welcome that I've received. So thank you for that. And thank you for the introduction and for beginning our discussion with what I think of as one of the very most important issues of our time, which is how to depolarize a society. The United States, my own country, is deeply polarized. I don't have to tell you that. Many European countries face the same problem. But there are things that we can do to counter, to try to remediate the polarization. And let me explain how changing or reforming the voting system can help with that. In the United States, for most of its history, there have been two parties that have dominated. For the last 170 years, they've been the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And for much of that history, the two parties, although they were different, were close enough to one another ideologically so that they could cooperate and pass laws, pass legislation in a bipartisan way. But in the last 30 or 40 years, that cooperation has been declining because the two parties have moved farther and farther apart ideologically, so that now it's almost impossible to get bipartisan cooperation. The only legislation that gets passed is when one party has a majority in the legislature and then can act unilaterally. But the problem with doing that is, first, it's very divisive because half the country is unhappy with the laws being passed. And second, it's actually quite difficult to get legislation passed by only one party. Even within the party, there are differences, and so unless you have cooperation across parties, lots of legislation will simply die. At the moment, for example, there's a budget proposal working its way through Congress. It just barely passed in the House of Representatives. It's not at all clear that it's going to pass in the Senate, even though both the House and the Senate are controlled by the Republicans. So Congress is more or less dysfunctional at this point. So what can we do about that? Well, it would be very nice if it were possible to elect politicians to Congress and to other offices who are not strongly partisan. They are not strongly conservative. They are not strongly liberal. They're in the middle. And they could act as moderators in the political discussion. Politics is largely a matter of compromise. And in order to achieve compromise, you need people there who can see both sides of the issue. So it would be nice if we could elect moderates or centrists to office. But the problem is that our voting system in the US, which is primarily plurality rule, does not allow us to do that. Now, what is plurality rule? Plurality rule is the system in which each voter votes for one of the candidates, and the candidate with the most votes wins the election. However, there's no requirement that the winning candidate have a majority of the vote, and very often the winning candidate has far less than a majority. So under plurality rule, it's quite possible to elect someone even though a majority of the voters don't like that candidate. And this happens all the time. So what happens in a polarized society? There'll be a Democratic candidate, there'll be a Republican candidate, and perhaps somebody from the middle will try to run as an independent. Well, because the two parties are so far apart, most Democratic voters will just vote for the Democratic candidate. They may like the candidate in the middle, but they think that that candidate probably can't win anyway because independent candidates almost never win American elections. So they'll vote for the Democrat. And the Republican voters will vote for the Republican candidate. And so the candidate in the middle, even though that candidate would make a good compromise, will lose, will get far fewer voters than the Democrat or the Republican. The Democrat or the Republican may not get a majority, but one of them is going to get the most votes, so one of them will be elected. That's what happens in today's elections. That's the predicament that we find ourselves in today. Now, here is a change to the voting system which would correct that problem. Instead of voting for just one candidate, a voter now has the opportunity to rank the candidates. The voter says, I like candidate A the best, but if she doesn't win, then I want candidate B, and if he doesn't win, then I want candidate C. So voters rank the candidates. That's the first step. And this is nice for voters because they get to express themselves more fully. Economists, of course, are very interested in preferences. But if you're just expressing your top preference, that may not be enough because your top preference candidates may not get elected. Wouldn't it be nice for you to say something about the other two candidates as well? That's what ranking allows voters to do. It allows them to express their preferences more fully than in a normal plurality rule election. Okay, so now voters are ranking the candidates. What do we do with the rankings? Well, under what's sometimes called Condorcet voting, which is sometimes called true majority rule. I like the term true majority rule for a reason you will see in a minute. Under true majority rule, we elect the candidates who, according to the rankings, would beat each other candidate in a head-to-head contest. So the candidate getting elected is the true majority winner. For example, suppose A, B, and C are the candidates. Candidate A will win the election if a majority of voters prefer A to B, and also a majority of voters prefer A to C. So you can see that the true majority winner really will represent a majority of the voters, not the minority that plurality rule generates. Now, let's come back to polarization. Why will this cure polarization? Well, it's very likely that the independent candidates in a three-candidate race with a Republican and a Democrat and an independent in the middle, it's very likely that the independent will be the true majority winner. Why? Because when we compare the independent to the Democrats, the independent will get all of the Republican support, plus the support of any independent voters, and that will be a majority against the Democrats. And when we compare the independent to the Republican candidate, the independent will get all the Democratic support, all the Democratic voters, plus the voters who are in the middle and would vote for the independent. So that too will be a majority. So true majority rule will allow independent candidates in the middle of the ideological spectrum to get elected. And once they are in office, then compromise between the two parties becomes possible again, because the candidates in the middle, the independents, can help negotiate agreements. Even more important, once independents in the middle are winning elections, the two big parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, have the incentive to move back to the middle, so that they start winning elections again. They don't want to lose elections to independents, so they have a strong incentive to moderate their positions and not take on very extreme policies. You see, at the moment, a politician like Donald Trump can afford to be extreme because he doesn't have to have a majority of the public behind him. But under a better voting system, like true majority rule, Trump could not get elected anymore. And so if he were to remain in politics, he would have to change his political positions and move to policies which are agreeable to a majority of the country. So that very briefly is an argument for how the voting system itself can improve politics in the US. And I've been talking about the US, but the same principles apply to many other countries as well. France has a presidential system as well. It's a little bit better than the American system. It's a runoff system, but it runs into trouble also, historically, with electing extremists. It could be reformed in the same way as the American system and get improved outcomes. I view reforming the voting system as perhaps one of the most important applications of mechanism design. Mechanism design, as we heard, is the study of how do you achieve good outcomes by creating good institutions, good mechanisms. A good outcome in the political world is an outcome in which elected politicians represent a majority. And how do you achieve that? Through a mechanism or a voting system like true majority rule.
Great, thank you very much. I think the only thing we have to do now, all of us, is to think about this middle and try to translate this knowledge to the politicians in our countries and to, I don't know to whom, but the main problem is to apply the system.
That's right. So there's some good news in the United States about this, which is that in most states, most American states, it is possible to change the voting system without the politicians.
Oh, great.
Most states have what is called a referendum or ballot initiative system, where the voters, if enough voters sign a petition, the issue is put on the ballot for direct consideration by the voters themselves. And in fact, in 2 American states, a ranking system has been adopted, not by the politicians, but by the people themselves. They vote, the people of Maine and the people of Alaska voted in a ranking system by ballot initiative. And this can be done in many other states too. I'm a theorist, of course, but I'm also interested in the practical side, and I've been working with advocacy groups to try to get more states to do this. It's mostly a matter of education. That is, you have to explain in the way I've been explaining to you. You have to explain to voters what is wrong with the current system, why we have got ourselves into this mess of polarization, and how the voting system can be changed in a way which will improve matters. But if a voter is willing to take a few minutes and listen, they understand. It's not that hard to persuade voters that things can be improved. But that is the most important work that has to be done to get change.
Thank you very much. So I move to the second question. I find also fascinating that in your research you have also argued about patents, so about innovation. So let's move to the other side, to the firms. And what you argued is that software patents may actually inhibit innovation rather than promote it.
Right.
And my question is, how do you think policy can strike a balance between protecting inventors because they want to profit from their invention and fostering open innovation, particularly in these very fast evolving digital industries?
Right. So that's a very good question. Let me say, first of all, that I am not completely opposed to patents. In fact, patents historically have played a very important role in encouraging innovation. If you have an idea for how to cure a cancer, for example, you may have to put an enormous amount of resources into the development of that idea to see it through. You have to develop the vaccine or whatever the medicine is. You have to try it out on subjects. You may have to, once the medicine has been proved to be effective, you have to tell people about it. So there may be marketing involved as well. Bringing a new drug to market in the American pharmaceutical industry can cost hundreds of millions of dollars. It can be a very, very expensive proposition. And if, as soon as you've developed this drug, someone else can simply imitate it and sell it in competition with you, you may not be able to make a return on the enormous investment you've made in the drug. So that's the logic behind patents, to give innovators protection, at least for some period of time, against imitation, so that they can get a return on their investment. And I'm fine with that logic. It makes a lot of sense. But not all innovations work this way. Not all innovations are once and for all discoveries. In many industries, and software is a good example, instead of one big discovery, a new drug against cancer, innovation takes place in the form of lots of little steps, each step building on the last one. Incremental change rather than big change. And in an environment where change is incremental and each step builds on the previous one, patents can get in the way. For example, suppose that in order to be successful, a particular kind of software needs 2 steps of innovation to get to the end result. Suppose that I'm one of the software developers, you're a different software developer. Suppose I make the first discovery, and I put a patent on that discovery. That prevents you from using my idea to develop the second piece. I can block you. And in fact, I have an incentive to block you because I want to develop the second piece for myself. I'm a monopolist, in effect. I want to develop the second piece for myself. I don't want you to develop it and eat into my monopoly profits. And so we have a situation where instead of us both competing on an equal basis to develop the second piece, I am shutting you out of the market from my patent. Well, that's going to lead to suboptimal innovation. And that suggests that in industries where innovation is sequential and incremental, patents may not be a good idea. And that also suggests that when it comes to policy, what products do we patent? What products do we not patent? We should take into account the nature of innovation in those industries. Of course, we want to allow for patents in the case of big drug discoveries, but we may want to be very careful about allowing patents on products which are highly sequential and incremental in their nature.
Thank you very much. I completely agree with you. So my third question is, again, it goes around mechanism design theory. And my question will be more towards another issues and the application of it in a very complex and evolving context in the world economy, where decentralized decision-making environments are more and more prominent, so to say. And two issues that are related to this are climate change policy and artificial intelligence.
Right.
So to what extent do you think that regulation, climate change regulation, in which the European Union is pioneer in a way, and also AI regulation can also benefit from the application of your theories? Thank you.
So let me talk about climate change first. Climate change may be the biggest mechanism design problem that the world has ever faced. Here is the problem. If I, as, for example, an individual electricity producer, say I run an electricity company, and in order to produce electricity, I use oil or gas to make that electricity. I am burning the oil and gas, and I am putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and that's contributing to global warming. But in the United States, for example, I pay no penalty for the carbon dioxide that I emit. And so I have no incentive to find a different way of producing electricity which does not contribute to climate change. And even if we look at the entire country, the entire United States, the United States as a country doesn't have a very strong incentive to stop emitting carbon dioxide because it produces only about 20% of the carbon emissions in the world. Even if it reduced its carbon emissions to zero, which would be very expensive, there would still be 80% of the carbon emissions being produced by the rest of the world, especially China, and global warming would continue. So really the only effective way of dealing with climate change is through an international treaty. We've had some attempts at that. We had the Kyoto Protocols, which had some success, but the Kyoto Protocol was never going to work fully successfully because it left out the two biggest carbon emitters, China and the US. We have the Paris Agreement, of course, but the Paris Agreement is not a binding contract. It's only a pledge by countries to meet certain targets. What we really need is a binding treaty. And we have examples of such treaties. We have the Montreal Protocols when it comes to chlorofluorocarbons, which cause holes in the ozone. We have cured that problem. Countries do not emit chlorofluorocarbons anymore because they signed a binding treaty in which they agreed not to do that anymore. And there would be penalties for violating that treaty. We need such a treaty for climate change. And we need it soon. But writing such a treaty is an exercise in mechanism design. How do you write a treaty in such a way that all of the major carbon emitters are actually willing to sign it? That's a complicated problem because if you do sign the agreement, you have to reduce your carbon emissions. That's costly. You have to get enough in return from the other countries who are also reducing their carbon emissions to make it worth your while. So that negotiations over a successful international climate treaty are complicated, but they're not impossible because it's clear that we would all gain from having such a treaty, that the world would gain. So I am optimistic that we will reach such a treaty. I'm afraid it probably won't be within the administration of Donald Trump. I'm sorry about that. He's just not interested. But fortunately, Trump is not the only politician around. It's very likely that whoever follows Trump will resume a focus on climate change, and at that point, I very much expect that we can once again make progress. Let me say that one of the problems with climate change is not just how to stop putting more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but how to take carbon dioxide that's already there out of the atmosphere. Because at this point, even if we don't add any more carbon, the world is still going to warm up because of the carbon that's already there. But actually, a well-written treaty can solve that problem by, in effect, creating a negative carbon tax or a carbon subsidy for developing technology for removing carbon. There are various ideas that have been suggested for how to remove carbon in a cost-effective way. These technologies have not developed yet to the point where they can really make a difference. But if there were a big financial incentive in the form of a negative carbon tax, that would open the door to massive effort into creating new technologies. So part of this climate treaty that I'm talking about will be creating incentives for carbon removal technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Sure.
So I want to pass the word to Ainhoa, because I think for students it's going to be very interesting to know a bit more about your career and your experience.
Yes.
So please.
Thank you, Inma. Well, first of all, it's a really honor to stay here with you. I think I spent all day talking about economics and game theory, but we have students of the degree and PhD students that maybe we can, with this colloquium, explore more deeper in the specific careers.
Sure.
In general, in scientific, okay? So let's begin. As we know, PhD students must acquire solid technical knowledge to succeed in their scientific careers. But in your opinion, what other skills do you think are essential for young researchers to develop nowadays, today?
Well, as we were saying, the world has changed a lot, and artificial intelligence is a big part of the new world. And I would say that developing skills for using AI not to do your research for you, but to be a research assistant in an effective way is going to be a very important part of the skill set of our young students. I may be a bit too old to use AI very efficiently, but if I were 30 years younger, I would be spending a lot of time trying to figure out how I can make this very powerful tool part of my research. Actually, I do use AI. I'll have a conjecture about some proposition in economics, and I can use AI to very quickly try out many examples. And if all of the examples agree with my conjecture, then that doesn't prove the conjecture, but it gives me much more evidence that the conjecture is right. And if the AI finds a counterexample, well, that's very helpful too, even though my conjecture is now destroyed. It saves me time. It can be a big time saver at the very least. So I do urge students to learn their AI skills.
I really agree with that, especially to save the time. Yeah. It's really true. And also, during the early stage of the research career, do you think it's better to specialize in a specific area or to explore and diversify across different topics?
That's a very good question. It's a very hard question. So I'm a theorist, and I have done almost exclusively theoretical work, but theoretical work over a fairly broad range of topics, mechanism design, incentives for innovation, game theory, political economy, reforming the voting system. So I like the variety that is possible in economics, and I would encourage students to add some variety to their research because it's fun. It's fun to do something a bit different from what you have been doing. At the same time, I believe in what Adam Smith taught us in the 18th century, which is that specialization improves efficiency. So if you become an expert in some field, you are going to be more efficient, you are going to be better able to make advances in that field than someone who doesn't have your deep knowledge. So it certainly does pay to specialize in the sense that you become an expert in some particular area, but that doesn't mean that once you've acquired that expertise, you have to do just that. You can. It is still fun and worthwhile to explore neighboring fields as well. So I guess the short answer to your question is some of both. By all means, become an expert, but don't limit your research just to your topic of expertise.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And the last question maybe is also for young researchers that they have maybe difficult to define their own research agenda. So what strategies would you recommend to help them avoid simply following academic trends or short-term fashions? What do you think? What do you recommend to help them with the research agenda? And with the research agenda,
right.
Don't say only the fashions that the scientific moment they want to research.
So I have never I have never been a proponent of following fashion because if you follow fashion, you're probably too late. What I am a fan of is following your own curiosity. The main reason, maybe the only good reason for going into research is that it allows you to satisfy your own curiosity. It allows you to set your own research agenda. There aren't many other jobs out there in the world where you get to answer the questions that you want to answer, and no one is telling you what questions those are. So if you don't set your own research agenda, if you're not answering the questions that you want to answer, it's almost pointless, I think, to be a researcher. You might as well do something else which is going to pay you better. There are many more lucrative jobs than being a researcher. So when I started in mechanism design many years ago. I started at a time when mechanism design was considered to be a fringe field. It was not considered part of mainstream economics. It later did become mainstream, but that took quite a while. And I think if I had waited until it had become mainstream, I would have missed out on some of the biggest discoveries. I was lucky I was there at a time when not everyone was working on mechanism design. And so there were a lot of good questions that I was excited about, which hadn't been answered yet. So I do encourage students to think about questions they are interested in, which perhaps are not particularly fashionable. I suspect that if they succeed in answering those questions, they will make those issues fashionable. You can help create a fashion by doing a good piece of research. People will follow your lead and take your ideas and try to develop them.
Good point. So thank you once again.
So if you want,
Yes.
we can open the floor
Yeah.
for one or two questions. We have
Absolutely.
extra questions, but we don't want to monopolize
No.
the floor. So
I'm
if you're happy to
very
take
happy
one or
to
two
take
questions,
sure.
then it will be great if any of you have some. Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Maskin, thank you very much. I really enjoy the variety of topics that you open, and I'm very interested in a lot of them. I'm obviously interested in forming new minds, to be flexible, to have to learn what they have to learn first in order to create afterwards. Right. But I happen to be very interested in American politics, and I think that your proposal is great. I think that's, for me, one of the best solutions. I was thinking, for example, the second round in the French elections is kind of similar, but I like your best because it makes people think on all the candidates. But it also creates, as you know, right now, the independents are never in the middle. They are always people that are in the extremes. They are libertarians. They are probably because the two big parties in the US are big coalitions. We in Spain are not used to that. Coalitions are really small. There are two big parties, but there are a lot of coalitions, and there are people that are different. But in the American politics, the two big parties congregate a lot of tendencies to the left and to the right. And the middle is this gray area that has people in both parties, and they don't detach themselves from those parties mainly. So you end up with having people that are really extremists in another way. So how would you create a tendency that changes that?
That's a very good question. I think the answer to the question, though, has to take into account that if you change the voting system, you will also change who the candidates are. That is, the set of candidates you get for office will depend on the system itself. Now, you are correct that at the moment, we do not, in American politics, we do not have a lot of independents running from the middle. The independents tend to be rather eccentric candidates, like libertarians or Green Party candidates or whatever. But if it were possible for a serious centrist independent candidate to win, that would give lots of potential candidates the incentive to run. And let me give you just a few examples. In the last American election, 2024, there were two centrist politicians, Joe Manchin from West Virginia and Kristen Sinema from Arizona, who didn't run at all. Now, Joe Manchin was a Democrat from West Virginia. West Virginia is largely a Republican state. It's a red state in the current lingo. Manchin had managed to win election a number of times as a Democrat by separating himself to some extent from the Democratic Party and voting more toward the center. He was was actually a very popular candidate in West Virginia, but things got to the point where he was having so many conflicts with Democrats that he could no longer stay in the Democratic Party, and he left the party and became an independent. And he considered running in the 2024 election as an independent. But then he realized that even though he was a very popular figure in West Virginia politics, he could never win as an independent, because the Democrats were going to nominate their candidate, the Republicans were going to nominate their candidate. He would only get the votes of independent voters. So he retired from West Virginia politics. Kristen Sinema, very similar story in Arizona. She was a member of the Democratic Party, but she really was too much of a centrist for the party. She left. She thought of running in the election as an independent, decided against it. They are now both out of politics. And this is a big shame, because they're both the sort of politician we need more of, and instead we have less of them because of the system. So that's the sense in which I think changing the voting system is going to actually improve matters by encouraging a Joe Manchin or Kristen Sinema, and I could mention many other candidates as well who have done more or less the same thing, to run for office, not as members of their former party, but as independents. I just wanted to react to something you said about the French election system, the runoff system. It is true that it is better than the American system of plurality rule. Having a runoff does improve matters, but the French system can also give rise to very perverse results. And let me give you an example. In 2002, there were essentially 3 candidates for president that everyone was thinking about. There was Jacques Chirac, who was the incumbent at the time. He was the president. There was Lionel Jospin, who was the left-wing challenger. And there was Jean-Marie Le Pen, the father of Marine Le Pen, and a far-right candidate. His party, like Marine Le Pen, is not just to the right, but very far to the right. Now, what happened in that election? Well, everyone expected that the 2 candidates in the runoff would be Chirac and Jospin, because Le Pen was considered a fringe candidate, and only a small minority of voters would vote for him. And indeed, only a small minority of voters did vote for him, about 18%, I think. But on the left, Jospin was not the only candidate running. There were 2 others. And so the left-wing vote was split in 3. And so, very much to everyone's surprise, Jospin did not get into the runoff, even though it's unquestionably true that he would have easily beaten Le Pen in a one-on-one contest. the runoff turned out to consist of Chirac and Le Pen, which was crazy. Of course, Chirac should have been there, but not Le Pen. Le Pen was much less popular than Jospin, but the French system, the runoff system, couldn't reflect the fact that when you have a three-way split among candidates from the left, you shouldn't reject them all, which is what their system promoted. So I do think the French system is better than the American system, but it's not good enough.
Thank you very much. I think we have a second question.
Yeah.
Benedict, well, maybe we can take three.
Thank you, Mr. Maskin. I have a question. Given that we are in a university, I would like to pick your brain about, you are from the US, you're from Harvard, so until now at least the US has the best research system in the world in terms of innovation and being productive and creating scientific discovery, and the Spanish system or the European systems in general have been lagging behind this productivity or this innovation in the US. So what would be characteristics from your perspective and your experience of a university system to foster like better research and more innovation? And if we can't change the system, what would be characteristics of a department? How have departments to be run so that they foster good research? Thank you.
Well, this is of course a very important question. I think one reason why American universities have done so well in fostering research and developing new ideas is their independence. A very large fraction of the top American universities are private. That means that they are not run by the government. They are independent of the government. Their researchers do not have to answer to the government in developing their research agendas. So that independence, I think, has served American universities well. But that isn't to say that government is unimportant. Government has been important as a source of research funding. There are, in fact, two main bodies which do that: the National Science Foundation and the National Institutes of Health, which together fund a large fraction of basic research in the sciences in the US. But a very important feature of the NSF and the NIH is that the decisions about which grants to fund are made primarily by other scientists, by peer review, and again, not by government officials. Now, Europe, to its credit, has been moving in that direction. The creation of the European Research Council was modeled very much on the American NSF, and I think the ERC has been a big success. But it's a relatively recent introduction, and I think it's going to take time for Europe to catch up to the United States. I have to say that coming back to Trump, Trump is doing all he can to destroy the American system of research, and he's now proposing to replace the review panels in the NSF and the NIH with bureaucrats, which I think is a terrible mistake. He's already cut a lot of funding. Perhaps this is a great opportunity for Europe. In the same way that American science benefited enormously from what happened in Germany in the 1930s. We got all of the great German scientists. Now is Europe's chance to get all the great American scientists, because the environment there is uncertain. I hope that the current attack on science will abate, but I can't guarantee that. And this might be a great opportunity for Europe to poach some very good people. But coming back to what I said originally, it's independence of universities and also peer review when it comes to funding scientific research that have been critical ingredients in the American success story.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for just a final question. Jaume?
So if I understood correctly, your proposal for the voting method is something like board account, right?
It's similar to board account. Actually, I'm a strong fan of the board accounts also, but true majority rule is not the same as the board account, because under the board account you give points.
Yeah.
And in true majority rule you make pairwise comparisons and you don't give points. But actually board account would work quite well also for political elections. The reason I don't advocate that for politics is that board account is strategically manipulable.
Absolutely.
And another feature of the true majority rule system that I was discussing is that it can be made non-manipulable. If it's done right, it's non-manipulable.
Yeah. But my question is, why don't you go one step further and proposing something in the line of approval voting? So,
approval voting.
Approval voting, you have to impose something, but you impose something very mild, which is just the threshold of acceptability.
Okay.
It seems more natural.
So, approval voting, for those in the audience who may not know what approval voting is, you have a set of candidates and each voter can choose to approve or not approve each of the candidates, and the winner is the candidate with the most approvals. It's quite a good system, but it has a major flaw, which is that it forces voters to be strategic in whom they approve. Let me give you an example. Suppose there were 3 candidates running for office, A, B, and C. And suppose that I'm a voter and I think all of them are okay. My actual preference is for A over B over C, but I think any of them would be good as a winner. Now, I'm not going to approve them all, because if I did approve them all, my vote would have absolutely no weight. I'd be adding 1 point to each of these candidates, and so I would have no influence as a voter at all. So I'm not going to approve them all. I'm going to either just approve A or approve A and B. I have to decide which of those to do. But that's a strategic choice. Whether I approve both A and B or just A depends on how I think other voters are going to vote. If I think B is likely if I'm afraid that B is going to beat A, I might not just vote for A. In fact, I might just vote for B. I'm sorry. If I'm worried that B is going to beat A, I might not approve B. I might just approve A. As a matter of strategy, because although I think they could both do the job, I prefer A. So I may not approve B. On the other hand, if I think that A is going to win anyway, I'll probably be willing to approve both A and B. In other words, although approval voting is actually simple to state, it actually is a very complicated decision problem for the poor voter. Whereas under majority rule, the decision problem is simple. You just rank the candidates in order of preference, and you don't have to think about what other voters are going to do. So strategic voting is critical in approval voting. It's not critical when it comes to majority rule.
Thank you very much. This was very nice. So before finishing, I would like to thank you again for coming, and also I value a lot that you approach science to citizens, and not only to citizens, also to the young generation. Actually, you wrote this very nice piece for Frontiers to incentivize young people or even kids to learn mathematics. And right. I invite everybody to read this piece in Frontiers by him, and also with comics, with very, very nice pictures that was very insightful. And it's very easy to understand all your theories if you start by reading this. So I highly appreciate it. So thank you very much. I would like to thank everybody coming here to listen to him and to take part of this debate. Again, thanks to the university for also promoting this approach from science to citizens, to the foundation again, and well, thanks to everybody, and especially to Professor Eric Maskin. Thank you very much.